Hello again. Now, land redistribution has been a burning issue in South Africa for a long time. In fact, land reform in its entirety has been a big challenge. And the government of national unity doesn't make the question of land an easy subject, with parties having differing views on land reform. How can this government prioritize land reform without reinventing the wheel? For more on this, I'm joined by the Vumelana Advisory Fund's Chief Executive, Peter Setou. Of course, the fund is a non-profit organization. Peter, good afternoon. Welcome to eNCA, and thank you very much for your time. When we talk land reform in South Africa, there's overall been an understanding that you've got three main parts. You've got land restitution, you've got land redistribution, and of course tenure reform. And among all of these three, there's always been bottlenecks. Where are the major challenges?
Thank you, Bra Dan, for inviting me to your show. I mean, the bottlenecks, or rather the challenges that are impacting on land reform are really well documented in a number of reports that have been done on behalf of government. I mean, if you look at the three areas, reports that you've referred to use your words on land reform. If you look at land restitution, while substantial tracts of land have been restituted, there remain some challenges in the sense that the bulk part of the land that has been transferred remains unproductive. And we've had a situation where, even in instances where those land parcels were actually saving, or rather where people were working, people simply have just lost jobs. So we are arguing that it is important that at a point where we actually transfer land to people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, we need to simultaneously make sure that such transfers actually work for our people. On the one hand, when you look at land redistribution, you still have a serious challenge where a number of large tracts of land are still sitting under government control. I think it is important to make sure that such land is actually transferred to beneficiaries of land reform. Yeah. And not only that, we need to make sure that there is the whole issue around challenges with access to finance is also addressed, because if there isn't access to finance, then it means people will be sitting with the land under circumstances where they can't actually get the required ingredients in order to make sure that the land works for them.
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts around capacity building? You talk about unproductive land, you talk about a lack of funding, but there will be an issue of skills and maybe proper resourcing as well?
Absolutely, Bra Dan. I think first and foremost, as you've said, we should not reinvent the wheel. We should look at what has been working thus far and actually just replicate what has worked thus far. And in that regard, government must actually create an enabling environment for private sector involvement and actively support partnerships between beneficiaries of land reform on the one hand, as well as the private sector. Because by infusing private partnerships into the mix, you can actually address the whole issue around skills development. You can also address issues around access to markets. You can also, at the same time, ensure that restored land is actually kept productive and create much needed jobs. But on the one hand, particularly in the restitution space, where you've got your communal property associations as well as land owning trust, our experience has been that the minute you've got these partnerships in place and some funds starts flowing, the community is really up in arms, and you'll have all those disagreements amongst community members. So for that reason, we are actually advocating for capacity building amongst these communal property associations to ensure that there is transparency, there's good governance, so that there are reports which are provided to members of the CPAs, and generally policies that can guide them in managing this land. In this way, you are able to have coherent societies.
Yeah, as we conclude, Peter, the government of national unity has moved land reform and rural development into under one ministry, taking it away from agriculture. I don't know what your thoughts are, though, briefly. Is that a good move to have that department focusing on land reform and rural development? And if it is a good move, what should the minister, the new Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development, prioritize?
Well, to the extent that the new ministry could actually focus on problems or challenges that are already known, I think it will help in the sense that there will be more focus and emphasis on land reform and rural development more specifically, But I think it's equally important to make sure that there is proper coordination between these two departments because of the cross-cutting effect of the functions that they are actually executing. And for that reason, the key priorities for me would be to, one, ensure that we address the shortcomings that have been identified through the reports, such as the high-level panel report, usually referred to as the Motlanthe report, as well as the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture. I mean, these two reports for me really stand out in the sense that they really provided us with a whole host of recommendations that must be implemented in order to ensure that land reform actually works for South Africans. For me, that is one thing. The second thing relates to expediting the implementation of the land courts and the land court appeal so that disputes around land reform can be adjudicated upon in a much more speedy fashion, because currently what we are seeing is that if there is a dispute, it tends to take rather too long. Thirdly, fast-track the creation of the Land Reform and Development Agency, as announced by the President previously, and ensure that it's funded adequately and staff it, most importantly, with people with the requisite skills so that we can ensure that this agency really ensures that land reform, as it were, becomes sustainable and it's enhanced. Finally, finally, I would say develop innovative ways of actually funding land reform, because there's a huge demand on public resources, and this exceeds available public funds. And if we are to rely on public funds to deal with land reform, I think we will wait for decades and decades before we can actually deal with the current challenges. And most importantly, address the current impediments that we are experiencing with regard to access to affordable finance. This needs to be addressed in my view.
Thank you very much for your time and insights this afternoon on Today. That's Peter Setou, the Chief Executive of the NGO Vumelana Advisory Fund. Now, as the Government of National Unity begins its work